He remembered being summoned into reluctant existence at the moment the first creature lived, and the certain knowledge that he would outlive life until the last being in the universe passed to its reward, when it would be his job, figuratively speaking, to put the chairs on the tables and turn the lights off.
When the first living thing existed, I was there. When the last living thing dies, I'll put the chairs on the table, turn out the lights, and lock the universe behind me when I leave.
Neil Gaiman, I am on to you. I am back in Discworld. It's been a couple of months since I made my first Discworld video, and after I said how much I enjoyed Small Gods, a lot of you guys gave some great recommendations about where I should go next. For my second foray into this world, though, I decided to go with Mort, partly because of how much I liked death in Small Gods, and also just because I've heard a lot of people recommend it in general. So as with Small Gods, I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the setting, of which we see a lot more in this book than in Small Gods, and I enjoyed the overall irreverent tone and the quirky, exaggerated characters, and all of the things that make Pratchett's voice so unique. But that being said, I did not enjoy it nearly as much as Small Gods, and I think the main reason for that is the characters in this book. Now, Death himself is a really interesting character. I very much enjoyed his antics in this book and how he constantly subverts your expectations for him, how he seems like this very stern, authoritative figure at first, but then turns out to be quite childish and humorous in an unintentional way. Unintentional on his part, that is. The chapters where Death is going around the world trying to learn about humans and fit in with human culture are definitely some of the best chapters in the book. Well, there aren't really chapters in this book, but you know what I mean. And the subtle intensity of his character and the way he seems kind of alien yet also distinctly human at the same time really reminds me a lot of Dream of the Endless from The Sandman. And it almost makes me wonder if that one quote about putting the chairs on the tables and turning out the lights isn't the only thing Neil Gaiman took inspiration from in this book. Especially the way that Death's servants talk about him and how they understand that he's ultimately well-meaning, but just kind of intense and incapable of understanding how humans think. Really reminds me a lot of Dream and how his servants talk about him. But aside from Death, there are lots of other characters in this book. And in fact, I don't even know if Death is the character who gets the most amount of page time in this book. That would probably belong to Mort, after whom the book is named. And Mort is unfortunately just not that interesting of a character for me. The premise of this book is that Mort is a teenage boy living on a farm in a rather remote region of the Discworld, and Death, looking for a new apprentice, decides one day to come to Mort and offer him a job as his apprentice. And Mort accepts, and he starts learning how to be Death. It's a great premise for a book, and the way the whole plot is structured is very enticing, and I couldn't turn pages fast enough. But at the same time, Mort himself, there's just not that much there. We don't really learn that much about his family life before he becomes apprenticed to Death. We don't really learn too much about what his goals for life were before suddenly having his life changed in this miraculous way, or even what his goals are afterwards. There's just a bit of a void in him. We know that he's awkward and not very athletic, but I really would have liked to know more about why exactly Mort decides to take on this job and what he's hoping to get out of it, other than that it's just something that he thinks is kind of cool to do, or maybe that he's just too afraid of Death to say no. What's interesting is that Mort actually spends most of this book having a lot of agency. He takes actions against Death's wishes and does all sorts of things that he's not supposed to. But his motivations are kind of all over the place. To get into some minor plot spoilers here, near the beginning of the book he is assigned the task of killing, or rather harboring to the afterlife, a girl who is about his age and also happens to be the princess of a small kingdom. And he refuses to do this and ends up basically breaking the space-time continuum. After that, Mort sort of spends the rest of the book trying to fix the mistakes he made, while also trying to win the hand of this girl that he has a crush on. But despite him constantly coming up with plans and executing them and changing the fabric of reality, really, opposed to Death's wishes. There's not that much interiority there. Maybe it's just because the book is so short, but we really don't get that much of what's going on inside his head. Why is he willing to risk the entirety of the space-time continuum for the sake of this one girl who he doesn't even really know and has spoken to like once? And maybe if Mort genuinely doesn't know what his motivations are, maybe if this whole thing is just a mess that he didn't really want to get into because he made an impulsive decision to save this girl's life and wasn't expecting all of these dramatic consequences. Maybe if that's the case, then that could have been delved into a little bit more. I imagine if this happened to me, if I accidentally broke all of time and space, and if suddenly like the whole world is unstable as a result of this one thing I did, I would be panicking quite a bit. But he doesn't really do that. He just rather calmly sets about trying to fix the problem, and that's that. And then you have one of the other main characters of this book, Isabel. Assuming that's how you say her name, I really don't have any idea. She is Death's daughter, and she accompanies Mort on a lot of his missions to fix the mistakes that he caused. And I'm going to get into some bigger spoilers here because I really need to talk about the ending and what happens with Isabel. So, spoiler warning. At the end of this book, Mort and Isabel get married. And that really confused me and frustrated me, honestly, because at no point in this book, while they were working together, did I ever get the impression that there was any romantic tension between them. And the reason they became friends in the first place is because they sort of bonded over their shared frustration with Death's annoying, coy hints that the reason he took Mort on as an apprentice in the first place was so that he would eventually marry Isabel. And she didn't want any of that, and neither did Mort. And they started really hitting it off as friends after that. The last scene in this book is in fact so strange that even now just thinking about it, it's hard for me to convince myself that that really happens, because it just comes completely out of left field. I don't know why these two characters got married. I think it's supposed to be a classic example of the kind of story where a protagonist is searching for one thing, in this case the girl that Mort risked the entire world in order to save, and then eventually realized he didn't actually love, and realized that the thing he wanted all along was right in front of him, which is Mort's daughter, who he met at the very beginning of this book. But there wasn't enough there for me to believe it. Again, I think a lot of this is just because of how short the book is. It really moves along at a breakneck pace, and all of the events of the story seemingly happen over the course of like a week, which is quite incredible considering how different Mort seems at the beginning and the end of the book. Small Gods was also really short, but I feel like the plot was a lot more focused and all of the loose ends were tied up very nicely, and also the protagonist in that book was a lot easier for me to get invested in. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Mort. I am going to be probably reading some more Discworld in the future. A lot of people recommended Guards and also Going Postal. I expect I'll probably read those at some point. The other day I may or may not have impulsively bought every single Dune book after the trailer for the new Dune movie came out, and I got really excited and just couldn't control myself. So I think I'm probably also going to be getting into Dune soon, because believe it or not, I haven't read Dune. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for all of the wonderful comments. And until next time, stay generic.